Hi, my name's Tom Fairman, and I'm going to take you through today some of the work that I did while I was a PhD student at the University of Melbourne, for which I received a Bill Borthwick scholarship that supported me. And I'll also go into a little bit of how there's been subsequent work done at the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning that I've been involved with around some of the issues that have been raised around frequent wildfires and the implications for temperate eucalypt forests in Victoria. Now, eucalypts have evolved in the presence of fire, which means that they have a range of strategies and adaptations to help them survive and persist even the most severe bushfires that occur. And that's shown there in some of those photos there, which show how rapidly eucalypts can recover in a particular landscape. The best demonstration of this relates to resprouting, where basically underneath the bark of the stem, the tree is able to resprout out leaves relatively rapidly after the fire, which means they're able to begin photosynthesis again. However, the question that I wanted to tackle in my thesis related to, well, what happens if these areas start burning more frequently and fires are no longer something that occur once every few decades, but ends up happening multiple times in one decade? Is there a limit to their resilience? So how I set about answering this question was basically looking at the landscape of Victoria, where there's been a lot of areas of forest that have been burned one time and multiple times since the year 2000 due to the mega fires that have occurred since then. What I did was I selected two eucalypt forest types, so snow gum forests and dry mixed species forests, which are found in different parts of the landscape. And these are comprised of eucalypts that can resprout. And I selected sites that have been burned at high severity by one fire, two fire, and sometimes in three fires within a 10-year period. So I was able to look at these different areas of forest and see how the eucalypts were responding to those different fire frequencies. So condensing all that I found into a few dot points, essentially what I found was that in the snow gum forests, which are found in the higher elevation areas, very frequent fire resulted in an increase in the mortality of the stems, which meant that you were sometimes losing up to 60% of the mature trees that were on that site. So the resprouting failed on those trees. I also noticed in those snow gum forests that you had a reduction in the amount of seedling regeneration, which meant you weren't having replacement of those larger trees. Mixed species forests were somewhat more resilient as they were able to resprout very well after multiple high severity fires, but we did notice some important structural changes where maybe the resprouting was occurring lower down the tree, or maybe there was no resprouting occurring in middle-sized trees, which means that you were seeing a change in the nature of those forests too. How does this relate to public land management? Well, the 2019-20 bushfire season, which burned 1.5 million hectares, really highlighted the issue of multiple burn forests. So what those graphs there effectively show is that prior to the 2019-20 season, there was already quite a lot of area that had been burned multiple times since the year 2000. But because of the large area of the 2019-20 bushfires and that they were burning through already recovering forest, we really do have now a lot of forest that has been burned quite frequently since the year 2000. And this will likely continue with climate change. So getting a better understanding of how fires interact with these younger forests is quite important if they're to be managed properly. Now, those multiple burn forests that I just talked about are particularly a problem when you're thinking about ash forests, which are some of the most iconic forest types in Victoria. And I'm sure many people watching this have been to an ash forest somewhere in the state. So the thing about ash forests is when they're burned by a high severity fire, the mature trees are killed and they rely on seed regeneration to basically recover. So not resprouting, which is like what I looked at in my PhD. The thing about these regenerating trees is that those seedlings don't have seeds themselves until they're about 20 years old. So what that means is if a fire occurs within 20 years from the forest first being burned, that forest can't regenerate as there's no seed available for it to do it. And you have a conversion to non-forest type, so a forest that's dominated maybe by acacia or grasslands. And as a result, you risk losing some of the ecosystem services associated with that forest type. This issue of ash forest at risk of conversion to non-forest type was quite a pronounced one following the 2019-20 bushfire season, where it was identified that about 17,000 hectares of immature ash forest had been burned at high severity and was likely to no longer be ash forest. So a program was developed that I was able to contribute to as well as many other people, where effectively there was the targeting of those vulnerable forest types and they could be resown and recovered by the aerial sowing of ash forest seed. And so this had to happen quite rapidly, and we were able to get those seeds in on about 11,000 hectares or so prior to winter setting in. Now, monitoring is occurring of those areas that have been resown, and we're hoping that we're able to see that those forest types will recover over time. And it was really great to see how I was able to sort of work on these sort of questions as part of my PhD project around multiple burnt forests, and then lead that on to being engaged with this work at the department.